Start out, what do you think went well or better? And what do you think was kind of rocky or you want to work on?
Well, let's start off with better, right? Positive first. Compared to last time, I feel like I was much better at classroom management and I was much better at articulating what I wanted, like from them. Like, hey guys, it's supposed to be quiet now, we're supposed to be doing this now, blah, blah, blah. I'm sure there are still like better ways I can do that. And I know as I like teach more, it'll become more natural to say those.
The other thing is you might need to actually define for them what quiet means to you.
Right.
So
because I also
don't use the term quiet when you mean silent, and actually define for them what quiet. At the end, I think the loudness was very manageable at the end when they were doing the exponential and the logistic growth, and I think most of them were making pretty good
leaps.
Progress. We've done in the past at the school, more with the younger grades, is we taught them what voice level 0, 1, 2, and 3 meant.
Okay.
And some of the teachers actually have a poster up on the wall, and it's like, voice level 0 is silent. Voice level 1 is your quietest possible whisper. Voice level 2 is a normal talking voice. Voice level 3 is excited yelling.
Right.
And they will actually, on the board, they have a spot on the board
where
they will write what the current voice level should be. We're asking kids to raise their hand if they had questions, but just about every question was a detail about should they get credit or not, and you didn't want to answer them then. So it might have helped to actually tell them what type of questions were permissible.
Right, and say like, I know you've definitely said, is this question relevant? Before, like, do you guys have any relevant questions? I know I've done that one before.
I say that, are there any questions that are relevant for everyone to know?
Yeah.
Or is it a personal question? I think for this, saying, I'm at the very beginning. I want you to grade this based on what you think right now. I am not going to answer any questions about whether your answer should score a point. Do the best you can.
Yeah.
Raise your hand if you don't understand what you should be doing right now.
Okay.
So that can help just define it. And these are just kind of the little things that you get better at thinking through as you practice. We kind of talked about a lot of stuff, but what would you put in this column for the rocky or need to work on?
Well, I've always kind of struggled sometimes with like being put on the spot and like speaking well, and so I think that'll as I basically come back from my hiatus in the nature alone, I think I'll get better at like explaining things and like being concise and like stepping it out, because I did feel like there was a couple questions that like I should have been able to be like blah 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 done, but I had to kind of like rope myself around a little bit too much, and I know I dragged out some of the questions, but I wanted to make sure that it was like well explained and like I just covered like all of the basics on that. So
yeah,
that's something I wanna work on.
Some of the things that can help with that is when you're creating the lesson plan, if possible, actually try to stop and think and say and try to come up with what you think are common questions somebody might ask.
Yeah.
And you can think through ahead of time what your answers to those would be. The other thing that you can do is if you find yourself getting flustered on the spot, you can use a trick that basically says, you know what, that is a really great question that I think is going to take me more, like I didn't think you were going to be confused by this.
Okay, yeah.
And I want to create a slide that's going to explain this. So write that question down for me right now and give it to me, and in tomorrow's class, I'll explain it.
Right.
So you can use that as kind of an escape of if you feel like crap.
This will take way too long to explain.
Or just like, I'm getting flustered right now. Like, I should be able to explain this one, but for some reason, like, it's not coming to me.
Right.
You can kind of deflect it as, you know what? I want to create a slide that really explains this, and we'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
As kind of your safety hatch.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing is You could also sometimes try deflecting the question to another student
and see what they say.
Well, see what they say, but also that'll give you some time to kind of sequence the answer in your head as well. So I feel like the biggest thing that I saw to work on, which I think also goes to the quiet part, was basically pacing. They were talking on the do now because just about everyone in the classroom graded it much more quickly than you actually realized they did. When I walked around, there was still a handful of kids who didn't, but the vast majority of students actually only took about maybe 2 minutes to grade it, and they didn't know what to do.
Right.
And so at that point, I feel like you need to do one of two things. Either have something to tell them to do when they're finished. Okay. So once you graded yours, I now want you to compare it with your neighbors, although that wouldn't be silent, but like give them something to do, or you're going to have to punt on the few students who just didn't follow expectations and didn't start it right away.
Okay.
And I felt like that was the same thing on the density table. A lot of the students who were talking, not all of them, but there was a lot of students who had it filled in for more than a minute or two before you guys kept going. And especially since those answers then were going up there and staying up there, I think it would have helped to move on
quicker,
faster. And so there's just a couple of times, and this is something that's difficult to judge and you get better at over time. But I felt like the times where you were having the most problem with the classroom management, felt to me like there were times where class was actually going too slowly.
Okay.
And if it went faster, there wouldn't be the gaps for the kids to be off task and to be talking about other things.
Right.
With the high school students, timers can be a little hokey, although I've often found it useful even with the high school students to say, I am going to give you 30 seconds or I'm going to give you a minute to copy this table in your notes and make your best guess of the categorizations. Really kind of signpost that. Stop, make sure you have everyone's attention. I'm going to give you a minute to do this, and I want you to start now. Go. So that might have been a case to say something like, these ideas probably are already in your notes. I want you to check if they're in your notes. If they're not in your notes, I'm going to display this again at the end of class, and you can put those in.
Okay.
That's always a rough balance because you want the kids who need it to get it.
Because that front table was writing the entire thing down. And, like, everybody else was just sitting there. And I did recognize that, but I was like, I don't want to discourage them because I know, like, Madeline and Marcus, like, have a hard time with this kind of stuff. And I don't want to discourage that.
Yeah.
And so that, like, and that was kind of, too, with the other stuff was, like, there was, like, a couple of people that have problems usually, and they were actually, like, writing it down and all that stuff. And so I was like, I don't want to change it. I don't want to move on because I don't want them to feel rushed because I know how much more they prefer. But yeah, I definitely feel like timers are extremely useful, and I probably should have given them a timer for the do now, like 3 minutes, even if I don't time it or whatever. You know,
just a statement of how long. So I think in the moment, I don't think that your decision was necessarily bad.
Right.
But if that's a pattern that you noticed was happening frequently, you would then want to think about, does it mean that maybe if you have something that you think some students are going to write down that others aren't, you can think about potentially printing off a few copies of them.
Oh, yeah, and passing them out if they still need
them. Or trying to make that slide be the last thing before they move on to something else, or the last thing before like an enrichment or extension question.